So I started my career at one of the big four accounting firms over 6 years ago. And in this video, I'm going to cover what I learned during the first year of the graduate program, which is what I started on. And if you're joining one of these firms or are thinking about joining one of these firms, hopefully you find this video interesting and useful. Naturally, I learned a lot of technical skills during my first year, whether there was accounting skills or analytical skills, but I'm not going to touch on those during this video. So the first point I wanted to cover was it was really important that I started to build strong relationships with my cohort or the individuals in my cohort. So as you might know already, the Big Four take on a lot of graduates every single year, over thousands, each of the Big Four that is, and they start in September. So it was really important for me to build these connections with these individuals that started in my year, and we were able to share experiences from how we worked on different projects, how certain individuals, senior individuals like to work, even sharing sort of technical experiences when working on financial models or whatever it might have been. So sharing sort of best practices in terms of doing certain technical work. So having these connections and having these relationships was really important for me to improve my own skills. And certainly it was good to have these sort of peer-to-peer conversations, because they can see it from your perspective, because they can see it from your point of view. They can almost sort of relate more to you, and they might be able to explain it a certain way, which a certain senior individual might not be able to explain it. So it was really important and really beneficial for me to have these relationships, have these connections. So I'd certainly encourage you to grab a coffee with your peers, have drinks, go out for drinks after work, and start to build these strong relationships. And it's certainly, I suppose the risk is that you start to look at these peers as competition, but in reality, there's so much to be gained from having sort of strong, mutually beneficial relationships with your peers. You've got so much to learn from them, and you can naturally teach them a few things as well. So I certainly wouldn't start to think of them as competition. And another reason why you shouldn't think of them as competition and have these strong relationships is eventually they might start working for a private equity firm down the line, or they might work for another advisory firm. So if you have these relationships and you build them and invest in them in your first year, they might lead to potential work down the line, or potential sort of mutually beneficial relationships for the firm as well. So it makes so much sense to have these strong relationships, and it was something I figured out very early during my first year. Naturally you're not going to get on with every single individual in your peer group, but that's fine. You can still be cordial, and naturally you'll have sort of strong relationships and even build friendships with certain individuals in your peer group. So I'd certainly encourage you to keep that conversation going with everyone in your peer group. As I said, going out for coffee, going out for drinks after work, going out for dinner potentially as well, is certainly going to be worth your while in terms of time investment. So the second point I wanted to cover was that it's really important that you're not shy in asking individuals for help, the senior individuals in your team. It's really important that you understand when the right point is to ask for help, because there's no point wasting time and trying to figure things out yourself if you've hit a dead end. So it's really important that, especially in your first year, when people in your team are more than willing to help you out and point you in the right direction, that you take up that opportunity. I think the best way to sum it up is you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you might be able to figure out the answer, but it might take you 2-3 hours, whatever it might be, 5-6 hours. But you might be able to cut that time down very quickly by just asking individuals for help. Given you'll be in your first year, they'll certainly be expecting you to ask for help, because I imagine you won't have too much experience before that of doing the same job. So you really want to be able to ask all the silly questions right at the start. And again, when I started, there was no such thing as silly questions. So make sure you don't waste time by banging your head against a problem, hoping that a solution pops up, because generally it won't. So ask your team for your help. As I said before, ask your peers for help. Certainly it's important to find out when that right time is to ask for help and not waste time. The next thing I learned, that it's really important that you not only highlight a problem that you might be facing or the team might be facing, but you suggest potential solutions to the problem as well. In the first year, you might not have the best suggestions for how to deal with a certain problem, but that's fine. I think at the start, it's really important that you show a positive attitude, a attitude of proactiveness, and by suggesting solutions, by suggesting how the team can move forward, I think it really sends out a positive message that you're thinking ahead and that you're proactive in nature, which is really important. And certainly now, as I'm a manager, it's something that certainly I appreciate when someone junior in my team not only comes with the problem but also comes with a potential solution. And I suppose going even one step further than that, if you can take a certain action to help progress the problem forward or to help come up with the solution, that's certainly something that's going to go down very well, and certainly something that you're not expected to do at that level, especially in your early first year. So once you do find a problem or do find a certain hurdle that you're struggling to cross over, think for a minute about potential solutions and think about what the team can do to move the problem forward. So let's take an example. Let's say you wanted to build a chart, but you just haven't got the information that's needed to build that chart. You haven't got the data. So naturally you can just go to your manager and say, right, we haven't got this data. Or another thing that you can do is identify, right, who's the right individual from the client side that's going to provide you that data. How does the data need to look? Sort of what duration does that data need to cover? What date range? What other variables do you potentially need? Are you thinking ahead in terms of, right, this data, if they provide certain information which is wrong, how is that going to cause a problem for you when you're creating that chart? So if you're thinking ahead and thinking about, right, in terms of the solution, right, what's the first step? It might be finding that right individual on the client side that's going to provide you that particular data. So instead of just going to your manager and saying, right, I've not got the data, here's the problem, think about, right, what's the first step in trying to find a solution here? It's finding that individual at the client side, what's the right data, etc. So one way to look at it is think about what your manager is going to go through in his or her mind when it comes to solving that solution. Don't just wait for them to tell you what the answer is. Think about how they're going to respond, and if you start to demonstrate that behavior, if you start to demonstrate that you are thinking ahead and you are sort of taking ownership almost of finding that solution, that's going to put you in good light. And it's certainly something that's impressive. It's certainly something that's going to be looked upon favorably. So I certainly want you to think about, right, if I'm only going to take a problem to my manager, what more can I add to this in terms of helping to get to a solution for the team? So thinking ahead is really an important skill that you need to develop, and I think you certainly need to develop that quickly, because if you want to stand out in terms of your peer group and really sort of excel, it's certainly something that gets picked up very quickly. So staying on the subject of impressing your seniors and standing out from your peer group, another thing that's important is the ability or the habit that you need to get into when it comes to checking your own work before you submit it to your senior, before they review it. So this is something that I learned from doing it wrong for plenty of times, where I just try and get something done very quickly, but sort of under time pressure, trying to get something out the door, off my desk as such, and not spending that 10-15 minutes to review my own work. You sort of end up saying silly things, or you end up with the wrong grammar. So you really need to get into a habit of reviewing your own work, spending 15-20 minutes if it takes that much. Review what you're going to send on to your senior. This is a really sort of important habit, and it really stands you out if you do want to stand out in your first year. Being able to review your own work and then inevitably provide a higher piece of output to your senior for review. So yeah, taking that 15-20 minutes after you think you've finished and reading it, reviewing it is really important. So the next thing I learned was just how important the accountancy qualification and the whole process of doing that accountancy qualification, the training, the exams, etc., is when you start on the graduate program at one of these big four accountancy firms, especially in the UK. And I've covered these in previous videos, and I'll link those up here somewhere. But it's just so important that you pass these exams and you do well in these exams, because you're told in no uncertain terms from day one. I was told on day one that if you don't do well in these exams, and if you find yourself in the unfortunate position of failing one of these exams, you do sit in the firing line. Your job is at risk, and so we were told from day one there was no hiding behind that fact. So I was actually appreciative of how transparent they were on that point. From the very first day, you felt the pressure of doing well in these exams, and I think it certainly helped me to take them incredibly seriously. I learned in the first and second year that you might be doing incredibly well at work, but if you're not doing well in the exams, and if you are failing your exams, you are still in the firing line. So you might be acing it at work, you might be top of your peer group, but if you're not doing well, and if you're failing your exams, again, your job is at risk. There were no exceptions to the rule. So the sixth point I wanted to cover was just how important it was to start to build a good reputation within your firm very, very early on. So naturally at the very start, there'll be sort of minimal expectations on you because people appreciate you need to sort of get adjusted to working at this big four accountancy firm. But as the months go by in your first year, people will expect things of you, and it's really important that you start to build a good reputation even from your first year, because over time the individuals you work with, the seniors in your team, managers, senior manager, etc., will start to speak about you in sort of wider team meetings, etc., when you might not be present, or you won't be present at that time, but they'll start to speak about your performance with partners, etc. And it's really important that you're able to give them enough ammunition so that they can paint a good picture of you in front of the partners, and that's really going to help you with your career. It'll open you up with opportunities, whether that be potential secondments, etc., or it might help you work on certain sort of projects that you might want to work on. So if you have that good reputation, certain individuals, certain managers, senior managers from other teams might look to give you that opportunity. So it's really important that you build that good reputation from the first year itself. Naturally, aside from just the performance, there's also the reputation of how you behave with other individuals, whether you're a personable individual or not, whether you do other sort of extracurricular activities, to call it that, whether that's sort of helping out with recruitment, helping out with training individuals, training even sort of interns, summer interns, etc. So it's really important that you start to build a positive reputation even from the first year. So the next thing that I learned was there was going to be a lot of admin that I had to do as a first year analyst. So these were doing the checks that made sure that the client was fit and proper enough to be a client of my firm. It's really important that you do this admin despite it being boring in the best possible way you can, and make sure that you're diligent when doing it. Make sure, again, going back to one of the first points that I raised, reviewing your work, making sure that any forms that need filling out aren't done hastily, and make sure that you're always going back over what you've said in the forms and checking it, etc. So naturally, as you progress and get more experience, you can go through these sort of admin tasks much more quickly if you've done them 4 or 5 times before. But at the start, it's really important that you are diligent and that you are taking your time doing this admin, irrespective of how boring you might feel it is. So the 8th thing that I learned when I joined in the first year was just how much training is provided. I was aware that naturally there is a big focus on training at these big accountancy firms, and that was one of the reasons why I was so keen on joining one of these firms. Once you get in, or once I got into working, I realized there's so much on-demand training available as well, whether that's courses on Excel, whether that's courses on particularly financial modeling, courses on how you can use certain software packages. There's just so much training available at your fingertips. And so at the start, I'd highly recommend that you take the time, when you have the time at the start, to do all these on-demand training courses. It's a great way to improve your skill set, etc. What I've realized as I've got more senior, and naturally I've not done all the training available, but you start to have less time in the day to do sort of training, etc. So point number 9 is that when you do travel for work, it is important that you remember that you're traveling for work, and so it's not a holiday as such. It's really important that you keep your sort of deliverables in mind, you keep your deadlines in mind. Yes, you can sort of enjoy the novelty of traveling with work and enjoy sort of dinners out, etc., in different locations. You do need to remember that you are there for work, and so you'll have particular meetings with clients, etc., and you need to be ready for them. You need to be prepared for them. You need to be ready to deliver on time and deliver to the highest standard possible, like you would do when you were just at sort of your home location. So When you are traveling for work, it's important to remember that you might be staying in nice hotels, etc., etc. But yeah, it's all about making sure that the work is getting done, and after the work is done, naturally you can enjoy your surroundings. You can go out for walks or go out and sort of enjoy the evening. But I suppose the main thing is that you don't forget that just because you're not in your home office location, and you might be working just by yourself, eventually you get to a stage where you're experienced enough that they'll send you out just by yourself. You still need to remember that there will be a client meeting there potentially, and that's the reason you might have to go out away from your home location. So it's really important to remember that, and you remember what the team needs of you even when you are away from the office. There are benefits of sort of having traveling for work, and I think I've touched on them in previous videos. But yeah, it's sort of important to remember that it's not just sort of fun and games of traveling. There is sort of certain reasons why you are traveling. So certainly something that I sort of learned very quickly. So the final point that I wanted to raise in terms of the things I learned in my first year, and this is probably the most important thing in terms of ensuring that you have a sustainable career, and that was understanding that I needed some form of release valve, because when I first started on the graduate scheme in September 2015, there was so much going on. I had to, as I said, comprehend the accountancy qualification and all the challenges and risks that came with it, going to training, doing the exams, etc., etc. There was a new job that I needed to get used to, new individuals. I was in a new city as well, and there was just so much going on. It was really important, and it certainly felt at certain times that all my sort of entire life was revolved around work and training for the accountancy exams, etc. It's important that you have the release valve, and for me that was playing sports. For you it might be some other hobby, and I've mentioned this before as well. It's really important that you have something away from work that sort of completely clears your mind, completely resets your mind. And so it's something that I picked up very, very sort of early, and it was something that I emphasized a lot, going to the gym 2-3 times a week, naturally making the most of every sort of weekend, relaxing on the weekend, spending time with friends, really important. So having that release valve is just so important, so crucial, and I think these days even more and more people are sort of understanding its importance. And now if you ask anyone, I think most people do realize how important it is to sort of switch off from work. So certainly that was probably one of the key things that I learned in my first year. And those were the things that I learned in my first year at a Big Four accountancy firm. I'm sure there are sort of plenty of other things that I learned along the way, but I think those were the first, a few of the more important ones. If you have any questions from watching this video, just leave them in the comments below and I'll try and get back to you. If you want to hear me talking about myths around the Big Four, click on the video on your screen right now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.